Christopher Clark, a Cambridge historian from Australia, explores the rich history and diversity of Europe. We often forget that this continent shaped the modern world as we know it today. So let's discover more about Europe with Professor Clark through this mini-series. Today we begin our journey in Istanbul, a city which could easily be mistaken for London, Paris, or Berlin if we were to cover up its mosques with cathedrals and minarets with spires. But instead, it is the meeting point of two continents. And when viewed from the Golden Horn estuary, it is easy to see why the Byzantines chose this location 15 centuries ago to build a city they called Constantinople, the gateway between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. It was at the very edge of the Roman world, yet also ideally placed to control trade between the East and West. The key was the possession of the Bosporus Strait, which would have been strategically useless had the Romans not learned how to navigate the treacherous rocks and shallow waters that lay in its path. This they achieved by chaining together rafts and boats to form a kind of pontoon that allowed ships to pass through safely. It was such an impressive feat of engineering that contemporaries compared it to the Isthmus of Suez. Yet here was a place where East met West, where the Orthodox and the Roman churches, Greek and Latin, and paganism and Christianity all rubbed shoulders, influencing one another and creating an atmosphere of unparalleled creativity. By the time of the Crusades, however, the memory of all those earlier influences had long since faded, and Constantinople was seen as the ultimate prize for Christian Europe. To understand why, let us return back in time, some 800 years before the First Crusade. In 432 AD, Pope Sixtus III dedicated a church in Rome to the Virgin Mary. A century later, a young monk named Patrick set out from his native Britain to convert the pagan Irish to Christianity. He may have landed in the west of Ireland in County Mayo, but soon found himself deep in enemy territory among the warrior kings of Connaught. Unable to speak the language, he nevertheless negotiated cleverly. He persuaded the king to allow him to build a church in return for teaching his son, who was blind and lame, the Holy Roman alphabet. After his miraculous recovery, the king converted and became a monk. Within decades, Patrick had founded over 300 churches across Ireland, having cleverly packaged Christianity as a collection of Roman customs and rituals. By the late 5th century, Christianity had taken firm root. Patrick's contemporary, Saint Columba, arrived in Scotland around the same time and made a similar impact. Having failed to convert the Scottish king, he withdrew to the remote island of Iona off the west coast and founded a monastery there. From here, Columba and his followers travelled all over western Scotland, northern England, and even Northern Ireland, converting the Picts and other local tribes. The story goes that once on the island of Staffa, Columba encountered a demon who prevented the locals from becoming Christian. Fearing for the safety of his monks, Columba raised the sign of the cross and rebuked the demon. Startled by the power emanating from this tiny man, the demon fled and never returned. Like Patrick, Columba blended local and Roman elements in his services, allowing the Celtic Christians to continue celebrating some of their pagan festivals, such as May Day, while reinterpreting them in Christian terms. These monks were true innovators, and their influence would eventually reach as far afield as mainland Europe and beyond. The Irish monk Brendan, the Navigator, for example, sailed west and discovered the Faroe Islands, Iceland, and perhaps even North America almost 500 years before Christopher Columbus. Around the same time, the Anglo-Saxon monk and scholar, Saint Anselm, known as the Doctor of the Church, wrote influential theological treatises in the monastery of Bec in Normandy. Meanwhile, the Irish monk John Scotus Eriugena helped preserve and translate classical texts in the Carolingian Empire under Louis the Pious. By the 9th century, Irish monks were traveling as far away as Constantinople to teach others the faith, and many thousands of European pilgrims followed in their footsteps, traveling on what the Irish called peregrinatio pro Christo, or pilgrimage for Christ. But where did they go? Let us now travel to the heart of Ireland to find out. Today, little remains of the once great monastic settlement at Clonmacnoise, only a few crumbling towers and a high cross stand amidst a jumble of stones. Yet during the early medieval period, it was home to over 1,000 monks. Founded by Saint in the mid-6th century, the monastery quickly became a major intellectual center. Monks copied manuscripts, including copies of the four Gospels decorated with intricate Celtic designs. Others traveled abroad to learn new skills which they brought back to share with their fellow monks. One such person was Saint Fursey, who travelled to Rome to be ordained a bishop. On the way back, however, he stopped at a small island monastery off the east coast of Ireland called Inniscarthai, meaning the island of the monks. There he attracted so many followers that the island had to be expanded to accommodate them. In time, it became known as New Ireland or Innismore. In the 7th century, the saintly abbot Brendan founded a church on the nearby mainland, which grew into the town of Birr. When King Donnchad of Munster invaded the island, he looted the church and destroyed the monastery. The monks moved to the nearby mainland and began building a new monastery. While it was still unfinished, however, the Vikings attacked and killed the abbot Brendan. Finally, in the 9th century, after securing royal protection, the monks were able to complete the building. For the next 3 centuries, Clonmacnoise remained an important religious centre until the arrival of the English in the 12th century, who destroyed it and replaced it with a church in the middle of the 13th century. In the early Middle Ages, the Irish took great pride in their unique culture and language. Indeed, it seemed that the further removed a thing was from Rome, the more likely it was to survive. Thus, the Irish preserved much of the old Roman world. They kept alive the tradition of Roman poetry and even adopted the title satrapy for their chieftains, literally meaning protector of the king in Old Persian. In fact, the very word Ireland derives from the Greek word iris, meaning rainbow, a symbol of peace. It is no coincidence that Brian Boru, High King of Ireland, chose the O'Brien clan symbol, a golden harp, as the emblem of Ireland. Just as the rainbow and the harp symbolized the peaceful coexistence of the Irish people, so too did they symbolize their peaceful coexistence with the natural world. This was most evident in their approach to farming. In contrast to the rest of Europe, where fields were divided into neat rows, the Irish practiced a form of farming known as lazy beds. Here, the land was carefully dug and fertilized, then sown with seeds. Once planted, the field was left alone. Farmers only weeded it once a year. If crops failed, it was abandoned for 2 or 3 years, and then returned to. This ensured that the soil was always well nourished and ready to grow. It was a practice that respected nature and ensured bountiful harvests. But all was not well in the outside world. As the Viking raids intensified in the 9th century, the Irish realized they needed help. Who better to call upon than their old friends, the English and the Scots? Together, they repelled the Viking attacks and secured the island's future. In the process, they formed a triple alliance, a bond that would last for centuries. Yet the Vikings soon returned with a vengeance. In 853, a fleet of longships sailed into Dublin and massacred the Anglo-Saxons living there. They continued their rampage until they reached the Scottish coast, where they slaughtered hundreds of worshippers as they left a church. Soon, however, the tables were turned and the Norsemen became the Norwegians. Under King Olaf X, Norway was converted to Christianity and became a formidable force in Western Europe. Its armies fought alongside those of France and England against the Holy Roman Empire. In the end, though, the Norwegians were defeated and forced to flee. Many settled in Ireland, where they became known as the Danes. The Triple Alliance between Ireland, Scotland and England had dissolved by the 12th century, and a new era was dawning. Join us next time as we follow the pilgrim's path to Santiago de Compostela, retracing the steps of medieval pilgrims on their way to see the tomb of St. James the Greater. See you next time.